The Big Short. Inside the Doomsday Machine is Michael Lewis's incisive exploration of the 2008 financial crisis, focusing on the rise and fall of the housing market bubble. Lewis highlights the greed, incompetence, and systemic flaws in the financial system, which led to one of the greatest economic disasters in history. At its core, the book tells the story of a handful of unconventional investors who identified the fragility of the subprime mortgage market and bet against it, profiting as the rest of Wall Street and the global economy suffered catastrophic losses. Key themes: systemic failure. Lewis argues that the crisis was not a random event, but the result of a deeply flawed financial system. Banks, rating agencies, and regulatory bodies all played a part in creating the conditions that led to the collapse. Moral hazard and greed. The book explores how greed drove the decisions of bankers and investors, leading to a culture of risk-taking without accountability. Complexity and obfuscation. The complexity of financial products like collateralized debt obligations, CDOs, and credit default swaps, CDS, shielded their inherent risks, making them difficult to understand, even for financial professionals. Unconventional thinkers. The protagonists of the book are outsiders who saw what others missed. Their stories highlight the importance of independent thinking and skepticism in a world driven by groupthink. Detailed Summary 1. The Rise of the Housing Bubble. The book begins by explaining the origins of the housing bubble, which was driven by a boom in subprime mortgage lending. Subprime mortgages were loans given to borrowers with poor credit histories. These loans were risky, but banks and lenders were eager to offer them because they could bundle them into mortgage-backed securities, MBS. These MBS were then sold to investors, including pension funds and foreign banks, as safe investments. The rationale was that the housing market would always rise, and even if some borrowers defaulted, the losses would be offset by gains elsewhere. This assumption was catastrophically flawed. Investment banks took things further by creating CDOs, which repackaged MBS into new financial instruments. They divided these securities into tranches, some of which were rated as low risk by rating agencies. However, these ratings were based on flawed models and assumptions. Enter the outsiders. While most of Wall Street and global investors were pouring money into the housing market, a few unconventional thinkers recognized the bubble's inherent instability. These individuals became the protagonists of The Big Short. Michael Burry, a reclusive and eccentric former neurologist, Burry founded Scion Capital, a small hedge fund. Burry's unique background and analytical mindset allowed him to see what others missed. He closely analyzed subprime mortgage data and realized that many loans were doomed to default. In 2005, Burry began buying credit default swaps, CDS, on subprime mortgage bonds. These CDS were essentially insurance policies that would pay out if the bonds failed. Steve Eisman, a brash and outspoken fund manager at Front Point Partners, was another key figure. He was deeply critical of Wall Street's practices and saw the subprime mortgage market as a massive fraud. Eisman and his team began shorting the housing market by purchasing CDS. Greg Lippmann, a Deutsche Bank trader, Lippmann was one of the few insiders to bet against the housing market. He actively sought out investors like Burry and Eisman, helping them buy CDS. Lippmann's role highlights the contradictions within Wall Street, as he profited from the collapse while his own bank suffered losses. Charlie Ledley, Jamie Mai, and Ben Hockett. These three amateur investors ran Cornwall Capital, a small hedge fund. Despite their lack of experience, they correctly identified the housing market's vulnerability and bet against it. 3. The mechanics of the bet. The central bet in The Big Short revolves around credit default swaps. These financial instruments allowed the protagonists to bet against specific mortgage bonds. Lewis explains how the CDS market worked and how it became a tool for profiting from the collapse of the housing market. By 2006, the protagonists had built significant positions in CDS, anticipating that the bubble would burst. The bubble bursts. As the housing market began to unravel in 2007, the cracks in the financial system became apparent. Mortgage defaults soared, and the value of subprime mortgage bonds plummeted. Despite this, Wall Street and rating agencies were slow to acknowledge the problem. Banks continued to claim that their positions were sound, even as losses mounted. The protagonists faced significant challenges during this period. Many of them were questioned and ridiculed for their positions. Burry, for example, faced pressure from investors who wanted him to abandon his strategy. The collapse. In 2008, the financial system entered a full-blown crisis. Major institutions like Lehman Brothers collapsed, while others like AIG and Bear Stearns required government bailouts. The value of subprime mortgage bonds fell to near zero, and the protagonist's bets paid off. Burry's fund earned hundreds of millions of dollars. Eisman's team also reaped massive profits, though he remained deeply critical of the system that allowed the crisis to happen. Cornwall Capital turned a modest investment into a fortune. 6. Aftermath and reflection. The book concludes with an examination of the aftermath of the crisis. Lewis highlights the lack of accountability for those responsible. Despite the enormous losses suffered by taxpayers and ordinary investors, few Wall Street executives faced consequences. Lewis also reflects on the systemic issues that remain unresolved. He argues that the financial system is still vulnerable to similar crises because the underlying incentives and structures have not changed. Analysis and insights. 1. The role of complexity. One of the book's key insights is the role of complexity in hiding risk. The financial products at the heart of the crisis were so intricate that even experts struggled to understand them. This allowed banks to sell risky assets as safe investments. 2. Independent thinking. The protagonists of The Big Short succeeded because they questioned conventional wisdom and relied on their own analysis. Their stories highlight the importance of critical thinking in a world dominated by groupthink. 3. The human element. While the book focuses on finance, it is also a story about people. Lewis delves into the personalities and motivations of his characters, showing how their backgrounds and experiences shape their decisions. Conclusion. The Big Short is both a gripping narrative and a scathing critique of the financial system. Michael Lewis combines deep research with compelling storytelling to expose the greed and incompetence that led to the 2008 crisis. The book serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the importance of accountability in the financial world. Thanks for joining me today. If you found this summary helpful and want to dive deeper into more transformative books, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Join our community of lifelong learners and stay updated on our latest book summaries and insights. And if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and share your thoughts in the comments below. What principle from this book resonated with you the most? I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep reading and keep growing.